Hi Biophores, and welcome to the last part of muscles, which is part 9. And in this one we're going to talk about muscles and bones and how the bone acts as a lever to actually create force in a muscle, to be able to lift things like your entire body. It's really interesting. So let's think of it like this first of all. I put the diagram here of a marionette because where would you put those strings in order to be able to have this marionette move as flawlessly as possible? And that's kind of the way it works with a muscle. Where do you insert a muscle? Or where is that force of that muscle? So as to be able to move your bones in the most easy way that can move the body in a gracious manner. So think of it like this. Think of all the bones as being a lever. Okay, I'm going to actually use a pencil, like a lever. So you could have a pen, and that's a lever. And a joint, wherever you have a joint, in this guy here, in the elbow and the wrist, whatever, the joint is a fulcrum. It's where something's going to pivot, correct? And we know that levers are acted upon by resistance, by force. So you have force of your body, force of your head, force of maybe a muscle mass is creating force on the body, and you're going to have to lift it, right? How do you do that? So you're going to have to make some sort of effort to lift that force or that resistance. Okay, so how in the world, I'm asking here, would you orient or insert that muscle to be able to move the bone as flawlessly as possible? So again, we're thinking of levers, fulcrums, resistance, and effort. Okay, but let's take that a step further. So the lever, we always think then in terms of a lever, which is a bone, right? A lever. And then that lever is going to have some sort of place where it pivots, a fulcrum. Okay, so this is the fulcrum. My pen is supposed to be writing. So if this is the fulcrum right there, and then in this picture here, one end is going to be the resistance. Okay, so let's make this the resistance, and this is heavy. This is sort of pushing down here. And if you want to remedy this situation and you're going to lift something in the body, right, then you're going to have to apply some sort of force in this direction. Okay, and so this is how it's always going to work. You're going to have a pivot point of heavy force, and then what your effort is going to be to overcome that. Okay? All right, so this is a really good diagram, this cartoon, because these two dudes here are having trouble with this rock, right? How do you lift this rock? Impossible, really hard to lift if both of them had to lift it. However, if you had a smaller rock here and you had some sort of lever, right, and a fulcrum, you'd be able, with that lever, to pull it down and you'd be able to lift the rock. And that's the whole thing about how muscles are inserted onto these levers, onto these bones, in order to be able to either lift a huge amount of force or actually do it very quickly and use less force. So you would do that differently, and you would set up the fulcrum in a different place. So let me show you that. Before we do that, let me just go and show you my pencil that I've made here. So maybe I'll have it with a background like this. It's easier for you to see here. So let's imagine I made some drawings where you have a fulcrum in the middle. This is can pivot right in the middle there. And then you're going to have resistance on the other end here. So something's heavy. So that resistance is down there. And my little arm here on the other end is going to have to do force to bring this in this position, right? Because your resistance here is heavy. It can pivot here and you can lift it up. And so now you have that force having to happen on that muscle there. Okay, now let's go back. We have different types of levers. In the third class lever, that's the most common type. So there's going to be third class, second class, and first class. And we're going to start with the third only because it's the most common. In that case, the fulcrum is not in the middle. the fulcrum is at one end. And the resistance is on the opposite end. And the effort that you're making to lift it up is in the middle. Okay, so that's the most common type. And I'm going to show that to you then on my pencil. And here we go. So now I've switched it because the fulcrum now is over here. It's not in the middle. Now this can go like this, correct? The resistance is pushing down on this end, and you are making an effort in the middle to lift this up, because if not, that heavy bag that I put here as the resistance is going to win out. So by having an effort in the middle, I'm going to lift it up like that. But remember, it's pivoting at one end. That's where the fulcrum is. Okay, let's go back. So we said the fulcrum's at one end, got that. The resistance is at the opposite end and the effort is in the middle. And this is an example of the biceps brachii. It works that way. And it works, look at this. An oar works like this, right? You have a fulcrum at one end. You have a resistance on the other end in the water. You're trying to push this water away, and you're putting that effort right in the middle here. So the effort's in the middle, not the fulcrum. Okay, so lots of different things that we use, like salad tongs, are like that. You have a fulcrum at one end, and then a load. Here you can have, not salad tong, you have a big potato here, and then you're putting an effort in the middle, and it makes things, you know, easier to manipulate. So here I was saying the biceps brachii is that way, so let's look at it. Fulcrum at the far end. Okay, resistance is, this is something heavy. This is my big bag of something, or your weight at the gym. And that effort, right, you're putting in between these two. And it's inserting right in here, and you're going to be able to bring this arm up. So that is a classic third type of fulcrum here, third class lever. Okay, if we want a lever that has greater force, this is different. Here, the wheelbarrow is the really good example of that. So think of that. The fulcrum still is at one end, but this time the effort is on the opposite end and the resistance is in the middle. Your calf muscles work like this. This is a type of lever that allows you to create a lot of force. And if you've used a wheelbarrow, you know that. You put this huge amount of rocks and sand in here, and this is one end here where the fulcrum is, and you can lift this up quite easily because of this orientation. So let's look. Here we're putting the effort at one end, the fulcrum at the opposite end, and the resistance is going to be in the middle. Why is that a really good example of weight? Look at this second class lever. So we have fulcrum at one end here in the toes, right? The force on the opposite end. But let's look at the resistance first. The resistance here is your entire body weight is pushing on you, right by your ankle. You're holding on to all this weight, and you want to go up on your toes. In other words, you want to lift your entire body weight using what muscle? Your calf muscle here. And so this is going to contract. It's going to pull up your heel here and lift your entire body. So this kind of lever, this second class lever, makes it so that it's not very fast. Like the biceps brachii can actually, flap really quickly, but instead it's able to carry a lot of force. Okay, so in my picture here, if you want to see it again, fulcrum again at one end, right? But now I flip these. So now the resistance, this is heavy. This is heavy here in the middle, and I'm putting the force at the opposite end there. Lifting that up. Okay? Excellent. So that is second class. So what's left over? What's left over is the first class lever, which is the classic seesaw. And in that one, you have the fulcrum in the middle, right? The force or the resistance on one end and the effort on the other. So first class lever, let's look at this one. Where does this happen? So we just shift over to this one. I've flipped it already. So now it's the classic seesaw. Fulcrum's in the middle and resistance. This is heavy here. And I am going to put force on the opposite direction so that I can level that out. Okay? First class lever. This is classic in your head here. So look, your head is heavy. That causes resistance. This resistance wants to come down and bring your head down here because it's so heavy. You have a fulcrum in the middle and you have this muscle here. Sternocleidomastoid here is trying to pull this down so as to keep your head upright, right? There's the applied force. And you can do it well. You can stay upright until you fall asleep in front of your computer. And then you relax this muscle. And if you relax this muscle, the force, the resistance here, the resistance is going to overcome it. The weight of that, right, is so big that it's just going to drop and your head's going to drop on your keyboard. So that is the first class lever. Less common in the body. Remember, the third class is the most common. It's just showing you again another way here where you can use that first class lever and you're using it to lift something that you ordinarily wouldn't. It's amazing how just the arrangement of the muscle and where do you put that fulcrum is going to make a difference as to the force of that particular muscle. And this would be, think about this clicker. This is a picture that I took at the Museum of Natural History in Los Angeles. I really enjoyed this because there was a fulcrum here, okay, big fulcrum out in the patio of the museum. And it had a lever, big, long lever with these ropes hanging. There was one here, a shorter, closer to where the fulcrum is, and then farther away, and there was yet one farther. And at the other end of this fulcrum, tied onto that is a truck, a regular full-sized truck. And what you had to do, what these kids could do, is hang from the ropes and actually lift up an entire truck. So a little kid that weighs 80 pounds could lift up the truck. And these kids were going crazy doing this. It's so interesting that you could hang from there and this truck would just rise up like this. And so this lever is very long. You could make a very, very, very long lever. And then the rope at the other end, it becomes easier to lift than this kid. So this kid here is closer to the fulcrum. And this kid here is farther from the fulcrum, needing less force. So what kind of lever is this? I'm going to let you figure it out. So here's a picture of all three of them together here. So you have third class fulcrum at the end and resistance at the other opposite end and the force in the middle. Second class lever, we have fulcrum at the end and we have the resistance in the middle now, and the force on the other end, and then the one we just talked about now, first class lever, where the fulcrum's in the middle, and this is the seesaw example. So it's nice to see them all together. So get those straight, because that's a classic question, exam question. And that is finally the end of this muscle chapter that was pretty long. So thanks for coming. See you on the next chapter. Bye.